Hi, and welcome everyone to the Maine Take. My name is Dana Connors, and I'm pleased to be the host of this program brought to you by the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. Twice a month, we take a look at the issues, the initiatives, and the ideas that work in our state, and the people behind those efforts in an effort to really try to improve the lives and the livelihood of Maine people. When I think back of the previous 32 episodes that we've shared with you on the Maine Take, one word comes to mind: the economy. Actually, the economy, that's two words, isn't it? Come to think of it. It's all about the economy. And actually, I think that is something that unites each and every one of us. We may have a different way to get there, but it's all about the economy. And I happen to think, when I say those words, of almost 30 years ago, when James Carville, who was a political strategist working on behalf of then Governor Bill Clinton, when he took on and was successful at beating George H.W. Bush for the presidency, his words were, "It's the economy, stupid." I don't know who the stupid is referring to, and I'm certainly not referring to anybody watching this show today as being stupid, but truth of the matter is, it's about the economy. And that's essentially what today's program is about as well. The program today is going to be devoted to the upcoming legislative session. We have our advocacy team with us today to talk about the bills that we can expect to see, and in fact, whether they represent problems or progress for our economy. And as usual, we are pleased to welcome back Peter Van Allen from Mainebiz, who always has a great story to share with us. So let's begin with the advocacy team at the State Chamber of Commerce and looking ahead to the next session that begins on January the 5th. Statutory adjournment is April the 20th. That's approximately 4 months to deal with probably what will be 500 or a little bit more number of bills and issues before the two bodies. Actually, we're going to begin by talking about the carryover bills that weren't dealt with, but were important to the legislature to keep them alive. And many of those have issues that concern the state chamber and the business community. Then we'll take a look at the roughly 150 bills that the leadership, the Legislative Council, has allowed to come forward to also be discussed. Once again, a little over 500 bills in 4 months to deal with, all carry with it repercussions, either positive or negative, either to grow our economy or to stand in the way of the growth. That's what today's program is all about. I'm pleased to introduce to you the ones you've seen on here before, with one additional person to share with you today. Let's begin with Peter Gore, who is our vice president, also oversees the advocacy team. With him are Linda Caprara, who manages the taxation issues, appropriations, Ben Lucas, who deals with energy, utilities, but also environment and natural resources. And we also have a staff member from the chamber joining us today who looks at the educational workforce issues. So Peter, let's jump right into it with you, and let's take a look at the carryover bills that we expect to see beginning in January 5th.
Well, thank you, Dana. As many of you are aware, I follow issues that involve the workplace, whether they're labor, comp, or healthcare related issues. And we do have some bills that have been carried over that we're watching very closely that have caused us some concern. LD 225 is a bill that would require employers, regardless of their policy, or if they don't have a policy, to cash out any unused vacation time when an employee leaves that place of business. We're watching that bill very carefully. LD 607 is an act to restore overtime protections for Maine workers. That's a bill that changes the financial demarcation line, if you will, between an employee who is an hourly employee versus a salaried employee. In Maine, that's roughly $38,000 and change today, and it's tied to increases in the minimum wage. Under this bill, it could go to as high as almost $58,000 a year, and that would have a significant impact on the workplace, how employers are able to manage not only their business, but their workflow and their production as well. There are other bills out there, Dana, that impact the use of earned paid leave, which went into effect this year and would allow an employee, to bring a private right of action against employee for an aggrievement around how that leave was used or when it was used. And then there's another bill to increase fines for workplace violations. So in my area, I'm sort of the skunk at the lawn party. We've got a lot of bills that are causing us a lot of concern that we're watching for the workplace.
Picking up on your use of the word skunk at the lawn party, our next skunk will be Linda Caprara, that I know has things to share with us. Linda?
Oh yeah, last year we had, as you know, a lot of anti-business legislation, and this year is no different. We have quite a few carryovers that are very anti-business and propose to increase taxes on Mainers. We have LD 428, that's the tax haven bill. That basically would require corporations to include in their main income from other jurisdictions around the world. As we know, Congress is really dealing with this at the federal level. We had asked the sponsor to carry this over in hopes that that would be settled and Maine wouldn't go further than that. So we're going to wait and see what they do with this bill. LD 1289, that's Joe Perry's bill. This would increase the individual income tax rate from 7.15 to 7.95. And as you recall, the legislature since 2015 has steadily reduced the individual income tax rates. So this would be really reversing that. We have a tax on Poland spring water proposed, 5 cents per gallon of water extracted. That's LD 1569. They were supposed to study this issue, but haven't heard anything from the committee. So we're going to wait and see what they do. This is a perennial bill that comes up every year. We also have another estate tax bill, LD 1704. This would lower the threshold from the current 5.7 million to $1 million. It's even worse than last year's bill, and it would make more of Mainers' estates taxable, really impacting a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, particularly those businesses that are, really generational. So we're going to keep our eye on that. And really, one of the most egregious ones I've seen in years is LD 1337. It's a tax on second homes in Maine. So if you own a second home, which really 3 out of 4 Mainers do, you will be potentially assessed a tax of 0.5% on that second home. Basically, if you occupy it less than 3 months a year, and as we know, Mainers go to their camps maybe 1 or 2 weeks a year. So you will be assessed if you occupy it less than 3 months a year. So these are really egregious bills that we're going to be watching for you. Again, it's a lot of, not much on the new horizon, but there's a lot dealing with a lot of these issues. So, yeah. Dana?
Yeah, thanks, Linda. Ben Lucas, environment or energy and utilities?
Yeah, thanks, Dana. So I'll start with the Environment and Natural Resources Committee. So the committee has a total of 7 carryovers from the first session. There are 2 bills that I wanted to highlight, both of which are bills that the Chamber opposed in the first session. The first one is LD 1532. This is a bill dealing with air emissions licensing. This bill would rewrite the air emissions licensing system to require renewal every 2 years instead of every 10 years as it is now. It also would require the licensee to notify every resident within a 5-mile radius of the emission site and hold a public forum to answer any questions or concerns. The Chamber opposes this bill because it would complicate the regulatory environment for Maine businesses. The Chamber does not want this bill to pass. The DEP already regulates air emissions standards, and new regulations would impact many companies, organizations, and individuals in the state of Maine. The other bill in the ENR committee that I'd like to highlight is LD 676. This bill would reclassify the lower portion of the Androscoggin River from Class C to Class B. The proposed reclassification is something that's not based on scientific results, and the business community needs consistency in its river classifications. The Chamber opposes the reclassification of the lower Androscoggin River at this time because, like I mentioned with the previous bill, it would create a lot of uncertainty in the regulatory environment for Maine's businesses. In the Energy, Utilities, and Technology Committee, they had a total of 18 carryovers from the first session. I do want to note that since the legislature adjourned back in July, the EUT has been having interim meetings where they have been having some work sessions on a few bills. So that 18 is now down to a total of 16 carryovers. And one bill that I do want to highlight that the committee has had several work sessions on now is LD 1634. This is a bill that would establish the Maine Generation Authority. The authority would be tasked with authorizing revenue bonds that are backed by Maine electric ratepayers for renewable energy generation projects. It would be a quasi-government agency that's structured very similar to the Maine Turnpike Authority. And this bill would go from our current system of privately held power generation that competes in an open marketplace, a competitive open marketplace, to a privately owned, a publicly owned generation authority. And that's a significant shift with many potential unknowns, which is why the chamber opposes. It's something that the committee has been discussing for, I think, 3 work sessions now, and they have another one scheduled on it tomorrow. The sponsor of the bill, seems to be very committed to, working something in the committee that gets pretty close to unanimous support. So the chamber is, certainly watching and following for any amendments or changes that might come forward with this bill. And the last thing I'll highlight quickly in the EUT committee is there's a number of placeholder bills, concept drafts, so we don't quite know what's in the language, but that's always room for having concern. And then we do know right now that there's an effort underway collecting signatures for a public takeover of our utilities. This is something that if they are successful in getting their signatures, it could potentially come back to the EUT committee, and a public takeover of our utilities would have an enormous impact on all businesses in Maine, all people in Maine, all organizations in Maine. So certainly something that is worthwhile to keep an eye on as it moves forward.
Thanks, Ben. Now let me introduce our latest addition to our advocacy team, Simon West. Simon is critical in our finance department, but he also is our human resource director. He's had a keen interest in education and has been following it this past session and going into this one. So Simon, why don't you share with us some of the carryover bills that you've been following?
Thank you, Dana. There are several carryover bills from last session that'll be of interest to the business community. I have 3 that I would like to highlight and share for our viewers. I'd like to preface by saying that these are bills that aim towards economic growth and that they are good bills that we support. The first one, LD 1652, is titled An Act to Build a Child Care System by Recruiting and Retaining Maine's Early Childhood Educators Workforce. This bill uses multiple strategies to increase the workforce and end the economic strain of understaffed early child care education centers. Some of the strategies they use include scholarships for education and internships, increased career relatable programming at the community college and university system level, as well as a better credit transfer process between those 2 systems. And then lastly, greater recognition for degree and certificate achievement, such as salary supplements based on education attainment and the experience of the people in the field. This bill had a lot of support and traction in the last session, and it's going to make up quite a bit of the portion of my time in this upcoming session. Workforce issues in the early child care education industry is creating a wave of workplace issues throughout many different employers in Maine. And as example of that, I was speaking to a mother the other night whose daycare provider has been closed at least 2 weeks a month for the past several months. And because she's missing work and paying full time for her child to go to daycare, it's looking like if the problem isn't solved soon, it'll be more economical for her family for her to leave the workplace. And this bill aims to end issues like that. The next bill I would like to look at is LD 1329. This is an act to establish the Career Advancement and Navigation Initiative in the Department of Education to lower barriers to career advancement. This bill is going to help unemployed and underemployed individuals get the skills that they need to better fit the current workforce needs. What it does is it puts a specialist in different hubs of adult education centers around the state, and it works with employers in that area to figure out what the workforce needs of the region are. And then those specialists also work with the students in the adult education center to understand what their desires are and then where their skills currently are at, so that they can help those students find employers that match their interests and also make sure that they have the skills necessary to fit in with those employers. This bill is important because even in great economic times, frictional and seasonal unemployment are to be expected, but structural unemployment is a real issue. And this bill helps to end the effects of structural unemployment, which is essentially the workforce that you have does not have the skills to meet the job openings that employers are trying to fill. The last bill that I'd like to take a look at is LD 481. This is an act to propose a general fund bond issue to train workers in high demand sectors and support the state's 10-year economic plan goal of increasing wages by 10%. What this bond does is it gives 4 annual installments of $20 million to the community college system. And then the community college system has to meet specific ROI standards in order to attain that funding. The spending will be on training partners, and stipends for trainees and programs. What most of these programs will do will build mobile training units to support construction, manufacturing, and trucking. And it will also work with workforce partners to get students who are trained in these fields then into employment. And one of the ways it's working to help meet that 10-year economic goal of increasing wages is the employers that are going to work with this program are going to guarantee that students coming out of it are going to earn at least $2 above the state's minimum wage. And we like this bill because it's going to help fill positions that are really critical for economic growth throughout the state. And those are the 3 major bills that I want to focus on coming out of last session. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Now let's turn our attention to those roughly 150 bills that Legislative Council, our leadership, has allowed to be considered in this session. It's not necessarily the end of their allowance for new bills, but to date, it represents about 150. So Pete, let's start again with you.
Thank you, Dana. There are just a couple of bills, and they don't have what's known as legislative document numbers yet, but titles that were submitted include one that deals with the enforcement of earned paid leave. Again, that bill would require that any disputes around that take place in a collective bargaining arena, so there's a CBA present, would be subject to the dispute resolution process of the CBA, which makes some level of sense. The other bill is an act to clarify the laws regarding the use of medical marijuana in workers' comp. There is increasingly a push to use medical marijuana as a way to deal with pain management and pain control in workers' compensation injuries. It appears that the purpose of this bill, and it's sponsored by Representative Dillingham, would be to clarify that an individual in a workers' comp agreement could use medical marijuana during the period in which the person is incapacitated or injured. That is somewhat already taking place. The problem is the federal government classifies marijuana, medical or recreational, as a Schedule I drug, and therefore insurers are not allowed to pay for it. It's not sure, I'm not clear, and we won't know to the public hearing what this bill is trying to achieve, but there are federal barriers to the issue, and not just, it's not necessarily something, even with a medical marijuana law, that the state can fix. And then the last thing I would just say is playing off something Ben said earlier. There are a lot of titles without any language. And what that does is, and they're carryover bills and there are concept drafts, it opens the door for some of these bills that didn't get through the Legislative Council process to return as committee bills. And so while in a lot of cases it's true that's not necessarily going to happen, I don't think anybody in any committee that they're following should simply think, well, it didn't get through council, I don't have to worry about it. If you've got a concept draft, you probably got to worry about a bill or an issue that perhaps you're not thinking about now. That's the only thing I would add. Back to you.
Linda? I know you're there, Linda.
Sorry. One bill that I'm watching is it's basically a bill that would provide tax incentives for Maine's paper industry. Don't know what this bill does, but that's the title. The other one was an act to basically look at the Maine seed capital tax credit, which we support that credit, and basically that deals with investments that are made through private venture capital funds, using private venture capital funds. So we'll be keeping our eye on that. Those are just two titles quickly.
Mm-hmm. Ben?
Yeah, thanks, Dana. So one that I certainly want to highlight, it was a bill that was led in through Legislative Council by Representative Scott Cuddy. It's LR 2473, which is an act to ensure Maine citizens benefit from renewable energy generation projects by establishing job quality and hiring standards. You can almost guarantee this bill will be almost identical replica from a bill that was discussed in the first legislative session, which was LD 1231. This bill would attach job quality and hiring equity standards to renewable energy generation projects in the state that are over 2 megawatts in size, and it would require a certain amount of those projects to have project labor agreements attached to them. So in the energy utilities world, while we haven't quite seen the language of this bill yet, it has the possibility and the potential to be one of the most problematic bills that the business community will face in the energy world. And I just wanted to highlight it because it was 1231 was a big battle in the last legislative session. It was one of the final bills that they were debating on July 19th at 1 a.m. Right before they adjourned. So certainly something to have on the radar, and we'll know more when the language of the bill comes out.
Good. Simon, do you have any?
I'm keeping my eyes open, but currently nothing has come through that's catching my attention like the carryovers that I went over earlier.
Well, in the last approximately 20 minutes, we have barely touched the surface of the number of bills that will be before the legislature. But as you have heard, they all carry an impact, and one that we have to keep our eyes on and be very diligent about our efforts to either pass or defeat, depending on how they serve the economy, our employers, and our employees. I've got a couple more minutes. I want to circle back with each of you and try as quickly as possible. They're big issues, so if we can speak to them quickly, it would be helpful. But clearly, in this November election, there were 3 questions put before the statewide public, and one of them, obviously, that received the most attention and the most money was the New England Clean Energy Project. And as we've all been witness, that went down to defeat quite significantly. A lot of reasons why, but probably at the top of that list is punishing CMP, even though they've made great efforts in the past few years. But that continues. When the governor on November the 19th signed into law the acceptance of each of those questions, they will go into effect the 19th of December. But as you've all read and are aware that Avangrid Central Maine Power has appealed that and seeking an injunctions, temporary injunction, so it will not go into effect. And what is the significance of December the 15th, Ben?
Yeah, thanks, Dana. So there's 2 things I would like to highlight. One, as you did say, on the 19th, the law will go into effect following the 30 days from Governor Mills signing it. So this will be the first time that the courts have a say on the appeal. And we know that the DEP suspended the project license recently, and CMP has stopped construction on the project. So obviously getting clarity as quickly as possible for all the parties involved is important. And then the second thing I'll just say is because it is a preliminary injunction, I think we can all agree this is going to be the start of a very, very long battle in court. But the preliminary injunctions are a good indication of what's to come in the future. So certainly a date that we all should be watching on December 15th when the business law court meets for their hearing.
So Linda, let me turn to you for a moment. We've just received word in the last couple of days that the revenues that were a part of this biennial budget, that budget which ends mid-year 2023, June 30th, has exceeded estimates by $822 million, almost $1 billion, with a total budget of $8.5 billion. What's some of the rumors around how all that should be divvied up, knowing that it won't be finally decided until the end of the session? But what are you hearing?
I mean, rumors, I mean, that figure is huge. I haven't seen that figure. That's over 9.7%. The rumors we're hearing is potentially there could be some income tax relief on that, giving it back to some of it to Mainers. We're also hearing, I know the governor had mentioned a couple things that she was concerned about, some of the necessities and the increased costs of like home heating and gas and that sort of thing. So we're likely to see maybe a proposal that deals with that. I would imagine that they would want to put some back into the rainy day fund. The rainy day fund is up to $491 million. That's huge. So I imagine that they're going to want to put some away for that as well. Hopefully they don't spend it all, but we'll have to wait and see. But that's kind of some of the rumors we're hearing.
Pete, I know that you have been watching carefully and involved significantly to this point on the whole issue of paid family medical leave. Where does that, I know there's a committee established, where does that stand at the moment? And what's your best guess?
Well, the committee has met 3 times, and they have heard presentations from a variety of different groups. And today they heard from 2 states that have a paid family medical leave program in place, Connecticut and Washington. Both states have approached it fairly differently. And that is part of the issue is, this is an issue that is, if you're going to do it, is better solved at the federal level, rather than states creating, 50 different approaches to paid family medical leave. But unless and until Washington does, states are going to continue to tackle it. I think the next big challenge for this group is to decide upon an actuary, because the study commission is required to produce an actuarial report of what it would take to, fund staff, what benefits will look like, what the take-up rate will be, everything that an actuary would look at when you're establishing essentially a long-term disability program. And that's what you're doing. So they continue to be fairly measured in their approach to this, addressing the tasks one at a time. They're about to go out with a survey that they're hoping they can get various groups that represent both employees and employers to help put out. They're going to be finalizing that if they didn't already do that today. So they continue to move forward with investigating how Maine might go forward with their own paid family medical leave program.
Well, thanks, everyone. I do appreciate, I'm extremely grateful that all 4 of you represent the Maine State Chamber of Commerce and the business members that make up our organization. Your success has been proven over the years. You're very, very good at what you do, and I'm grateful that you're doing it. So, but I do have to turn it over to our good friend, Peter Van Allen from Mainebiz, who recently wrote an article as a result of a grand opening that he participated in, and that was at Rock Row in Westbrook. And Peter is here to tell us all about the company and what it does and why it's significant. Peter, welcome back to the show as usual. Hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving.
I thought this would be of interest. I mean, it had a lot of traction with our readers. The opening of REI, or Recreational Equipment Incorporated. This is a retailer of outdoor gear that's based in Seattle. They have 168 stores, although this is the first one in Maine. So the store is 24,000 square feet. And it's interesting, I think. I mean, we have a lot of outdoor retailers in Maine. I mean, from LL Bean to Cabela's to Eastern Mountain Sports, and on down the line, as well as small manufacturers making all kinds of different outdoor products. So I think if there's sort of a niche that the REI store fills, I mean, they have have some hard goods that some of the other retailers don't have, like climbing gear and some snowboarding gear and that kind of thing. But they're in that mix. They're in the same mix with LL Bean and even Cabela's and Eastern Mountain Sports is a direct competitor of theirs. So I was at the grand opening, which was pretty cool. I mean, it was really crowded, and there were booths set up throughout the store, including a booth from the Maine outdoor brands and various nonprofits that do trail maintenance and that kind of thing, mountain bike trails, and different retailers all had tables there. So it was pretty neat. The larger part of this development is also a story, quite frankly, which is this Rock Row development, because you've got Market Basket there. Chase Bank is about to open a branch, and like the craziest, busiest Chick-fil-A restaurant I've ever seen. The line around the store waiting to get in there. And then one thing that I think will be a very significant development, and it was just announced recently, is Rock Row is going to have a conference or convention center there. And they're saying it's going to be a $75 million convention center. Rock Row is it's a development. They're saying it's going to be $500 million. I mean, it's pretty remarkable in that, we're talking about a former quarry in Westbrook, just across the Portland-Westbrook line. And this is really turning out to be a pretty significant development now with REI and, of course, Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, of course, Chick-fil-A. Actually, it is. I mean, it's a dynamite story. It's almost a state of disbelief that at a time we're in, that commitment has been made and progress is being experienced. And it's really very exciting, not just for Westbrook, but for the entire state because of what they bring. And they tend to be new companies, new stores, new ideas that tend to be a part of it. So it's fascinating, I think. REI is also pretty fascinating because when I read a bit, I confess it wasn't extensive, but they are very member driven. They're, I won't say employee owned, but member owned, almost like a co-op, and their philanthropic, is pretty outstanding. I was reading that 70% of what their profits get turned back to different organizations within the state that they value. It's fascinating.
Sign up, you're basically a member for life once you sign up, and depending on how much you spend there each year, you'll get some kind of dividend back at the end of the year. And they claim to be the largest consumer co-op, and they have 20 million of these lifetime members. So it's kind of an unusual business model, a little bit different, but when you go in there, it's just like any other retailer, basically. And they got a lot of, nice, shiny, if you're into that kind of stuff, they have a lot of nice, shiny equipment and all kinds of technical gear and jackets and apparel and, all kinds of different things. So they're definitely a big time retailer in this field.
And Maine is an outdoor state, if you will. And when you think of how the portfolio has expanded, you got LL Bean, Cabela, you've got a number of companies, and this just simply adds to the choices that people have. I'm going to test your memory on this one. I read that in 1938, it all started with an ice axe. Tell me more.
Well, I unfortunately I'm not that well versed on it. I don't know the story of the ice axe, but they do have a nice long tradition. I'd have to go back and do a little bit more digging, so to speak, my own ice axe, my reporter's ice axe.
Well, I'm not going to be able to help you much, but it was about a couple, a husband and wife, who were looking for an ice axe and weren't able to find it. And that incentive grew out of that desire. So the rest, they say, is history, but didn't expect it. Yeah.
Patagonia had a similar history. So Patagonia was founded by Yvon Chouinard, who was born in Lisbon Falls and grew up in that area, moved to California when he was young. He was a big rock climber, and he developed this thing they call a piton, which you hook it something on the rock. I'm not a rock climber. And it, they made them really well. And that was kind of the beginning. He sold off that part of the business. Eventually he got into, other types of products, but this is the kind of, that's how a lot of these companies get their start, with one really good product.
Yeah, it grows out of an idea and an entrepreneur who finds that magical word called innovation, and the rest just becomes a successful company. So
there you go.
Great story, Peter. Appreciate you being on as usual, and look forward to seeing you back on December the 14th, I guess, is our next program. So, and you mentioned outdoor brands. That's one that we're going to have on at that time, as well as Maine Life, which is a very popular show that we're delighted to bring both of those to the Maine public because of their positive outlook and the opportunities that they present for each and every one of us. So, but thanks again. It's great having you on the show, and look forward to seeing you back here in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Maine Take, our takeaway, I guess, from this week's program. It's all about the economy, no question about it. It's something that unites all of us. Every issue that we speak of in some way has that connection. And not intended, but it's always we all seem to fall victim to sometimes the gloom and doom, the negative. But in the spirit of where we ended the show today, but also the time of year of Thanksgiving, we do have something to be thankful for when we look at where we are today in the economy. Think about where we were a year ago at about this time. The economy was very constrained. People weren't spending money. Demand was not high. Frankly, there was a lot of fear and anxiety. Travel was not happening to speak of. And everyone was begging for a vaccine. That was the priority. This year, 2021, the vaccine is here, and the booster is available, and great progress has been made. Yes, it's not completely over yet. It's not totally behind us, but progress is being made in spite of some of the spikes in hospitalization and so forth. But on the economic front, there's a lot to feel good about in this holiday season. Spending is very strong. Sales are up. Demand is up. People are buying local, which we always endorse, but this year it seems to be stronger than ever. The employment is up, travel is up, and we just read today that the hospitality and restaurant industry has had a banner year. The $2.5 billion that they have experienced in sales between June and September exceeds by $1 billion of last year. And frankly, 14%, or the $2.2 billion that they experienced in 2019. And that was a result of 10 million people coming to our state. Yeah, things are looking good, and the economic signs are encouraging. And frankly, there's reason to be hopeful. It's important that we keep our eye on the positive. So that is so fundamental a part of a successful economy and lifting people's spirits. I'm not saying we should deny the negative. As a matter of fact, it's important that we are transparent about the things that stand in the way of economic growth. And we know what they are right today. The workforce shortage, it was a problem before the pandemic, made worse by the pandemic. The supply chain issues, inflation are both troubling signs. And yes, they probably are issues that we're going to have a hard time as a state alone to tackle, but they are an issue. We also know that the Delta variant is still with us. It still haunts us, and knocking at our door is the latest Omicron. We're not sure of the impact, but we know it's out there, it's real, it needs to be studied and analyzed. And certainly the legislative session that we have just shared with you by way of our advocacy team here at the Chamber. These are issues that stand in the way of progress, not to be denied, but to be understood. But the question is, what will make the difference to determine that this glass that we want to see half full will be half full, but not half empty? To a large degree, I think that depends on you and I, our attitude, but also our actions. Actions in this respect, that to solve some of these issues, we've got to come together, we've got to stay together, but we also have to work together. And when you look at those issues that I just outlined, once again, that's probably the secret to success. When we look at workforce, for example, we know that the strategic plan places a priority on workforce like we've not seen before. We also know that in the workforce, the business and education community are working together because of the priority that education has for the skills needed in today's economy. Think of Maine Spark, who has set up a goal of 60% of our people will have a certificate of value in our state. These are all very, very important. When you think of other issues like the legislative stuff that we just discussed, I can assure you that our team will be there to represent your interests like many other membership organizations will be. But I also want to point out that so much of this depends on connection. It's about caring, it's about connections, it's about consideration of others. But for this issue, it's about connection. And this is what I mean by that. Each and every one of you at the local level, particularly the business community, know your legislator. And when these issues come forward, it's extremely important that you speak out and speak to them about what it is that will help your company or stand in the way of growth. And as far as the COVID goes, that's clearly one that rests with each of us, that we need to be vigilant. We need to be responsible, wearing our mask, social distancing, getting your vaccination, doing the things that are expected of us, because the truth is we need to be kind to ourselves, but we also need to be kind to one another. As our earlier message to the public was, this is me counting on you, just as you would count on me. We do need to be cautious. We do need to care, and we do need to be connected. Looking out for one another is really what it's all about. And in truth, that is the main way. We've experienced it time and time again. Whenever a crisis or a challenge arises, we do look out for each other. That's the main way, and it always works. That's the Maine Take for this week, and we look forward to seeing you back here on December 14th. Outdoor brands and Maine life will be our topics, great topics, positive topics that will leave you feeling good. In the meantime, enjoy, and thanks to you, our sponsors, to you, our viewers, and to all who we look forward to working with. Until then, take care.